What's up guys, my name is Greg Lester and this is Game Audio Analysis, and today I'll be recreating the iconic BFG-9000 sound from Doom Eternal using only this pair of keys. The Doom franchise has been around for a very long time. The game, the visuals, and most importantly the sound design have evolved a lot over the years. I want to show you a quick clip of the evolution of the BFG and its sound design from the first Doom in 1993 to the latest release in 2020. This video was inspired by an article written by Coen for designingsound.org, in which he recreated the sound of the BFG from Doom 2016 using only a beer can. Oscar goes through the process in great detail and the end result is frankly brilliant. A link to the article, as always, is in the description. Usually, the first step in analyzing a sound is to examine its structure. Does the sound have multiple stages that play in a specific sequence? Because we're recreating a sound effect that accompanies an item in a game, we can use the in-game animations for the BFG-9000 as a reference to break the sound down into all of its different elements. First, let's take a look at the mechanical parts. There are three moving parts in the gun: the arcs of electricity on the sides, the plasma chamber in the middle, and a row of small switches next to the side of the chamber. These mechanical elements happen at the start of the sound before the shot, and then again at the end of the animation. Next, we have the laser or plasma components, which consist of another three parts: the charge, the shot, and the tail, which is initially shown as a projectile traveling into the distance, and again as the weapon is winding down. Lastly, we have some additional ambient elements. While these aren't part of the main sound effect, ambience is important to help give a feeling of the space the sound is happening in. Games will often have algorithms that generate ambient reverb in real time. But for this individual example, I'll add a little reverb of my own. Before we start recording, we want to make sure that our sample rate is set to 96 kHz. This allows us to pitch shift any samples that we record without the quality deteriorating too much. Step 1. Record the source material. Step 2. Cut up all of the sounds. Step 3. Define the layers. For this effect, I split the sound into 6 layers: a mechanical layer which plays at the start and end of the sound, a weapon charging layer, a laser firing sound, with an additional body layer to give the sound character, the weapon tail, and an ambient layer that plays throughout the sound effect. Step 4. Pick the sounds and start processing. I used a ton of plugins for this sound, but the essentials are compression, EQ, reverb, and distortion. The exact plugins I've used are ones that I like, but you can use any compressor or EQ plugin you want and achieve the same kind of effect. First up, the mechanics layer, which is very straightforward. I auditioned the various samples I'd recorded, picked the ones that I liked, and pitch shifted some of them to change the tonality. I put a lot of compression on them, used an EQ to get rid of the low frequencies, and added some saturation to make the sounds a bit more gnarly and aggressive. To add a more sci-fi feel to the weapon, I processed 2 of the sounds with a dimension expander that creates an artificial stereo effect, and added the Valhalla Freak EQ, which is a delay that modulates the frequency of the repeats. If you make the delay short enough, you get a weird watery texture that make for some really cool plasma sounds. The charging layer only consists of 2 sounds, with the first one doing the heavy lifting. There's 6 main steps to creating these sounds. First, we time stretch the crap out of our samples so they start to sound super metallic. Step 2, Add a bit crusher to get some crunch and create the slightly watery texture that you get when you reduce the fidelity of a sound. Step 3 is the main difference between the two samples. One has a phaser with a high rate and lots of feedback to get a kind of tremolo effect, and the other one has some heavy distortion instead. Step 4. Automate the pitch of the samples to curve upwards over time. This gives the sound a feeling of momentum as the weapon winds up. Step 5. Add an aggressive compressor to tighten the sound and add plenty of grit and loudness. Lastly, automate the volume so that it ramps up slowly and then drops back down to a very low volume after a short decay. This reinforces the sense of the weapon charging up, but also gives us more control over how the sound interacts with the reverb. If we want a longer tail, lower the volume slowly. If a long tail is too muddy, bring the volume down faster. This can sound more natural than automating the parameters on a reverb plugin. With that done, it's just a case of adding any compression, saturation, chorus, etc. to give the sound some more character. The laser shot layer consists of 7 sounds which are heavily processed. This is where things get very interesting, as I'm using a technique called resampling, where you apply processes to a sound, render out a copy with the processes completed, and then reapply the processes to this new version. So you go from this, to this, to this. The processes used are slightly different for each sample, but this is a rough overview of what you can do to make your own sounds. If you want to see a super in-depth breakdown of all of the methods used in this project, head over to my Patreon. Link is in the description. First, choose your sample. Ideally, you want something that has a strong transient like a drum hit. Add an EQ with a high Q value to create a narrow resonant peak, and then use automation to sweep the center frequency from high to low. Adding pitch automation that sweeps high to low with the EQ can make the effect even more intense. Then add a chorus and a small amount of reverb to make the sound feel wider and give it more of a sci-fi vibe, and a bit of distortion or saturation to give the sound some edge. Tweak the automation of the pitch and EQ to suit, and voila, we have a makeshift laser sound. From here you can add effects to your heart's content. Resample, create multiple separate samples, experiment and see what you can create. The body sounds were nice and simple. I pitched down a few impact samples and automated an EQ to create a very short resonant sweep in the low end. I added some chorus and a tube compressor to make the sound a little more aggressive, and that was it. The tail sound is made from one of the laser samples that I made earlier with some additional chorus and reverb and a low pass filter. Because the sound represents the projectile which is traveling away from the player, it's more important to communicate the sense of where it is in the game space. To do this, I automated the reverb mix to increase over time, making the projectile sound more distant as it travels further away. I also automated the frequency of the low pass filter to decrease over time, adding to the illusion of distance. The final layer is the ambience layer. I split this into 2 separate sounds, one of which is low and the other high. This adds more depth to the ambience and gives us more control by being able to get the volume of the high and the low frequencies individually. I took a key scraping sound, time stretched it to lower the pitch, and then added lots of reverb. I added a touch of compression to keep the sound consistent, and then duplicated the sound using EQ on each to create 2 different versions, one focused on low frequencies and one focused on high frequencies. The last step of the process is the mastering. I left it quite minimal with the standard chain of multiband compression to help bring out any subtle details in the sound, a limiter for loudness and peak reduction, and one of my favorite compressors to add character and glue the separate parts together. And with that, here is our finished BFG-9000 sound. I think it sounds pretty great, and it was a super fun challenge to create it using only a single object. Have a go at creating one of your favorite iconic sounds using only one object, and let me know how it goes. I hope you learned something, and as always, thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel, then please go and check out our Patreon, and be sure to subscribe for more content like this.